On May 31st, 1916, the greatest and largest naval battle in history was fought in the North Sea. It saw the entire strength of the two most powerful navies on Earth clash in one enormous battle at the height of the First World War. But of the 64 British and German capital ships that fought at Jutland, only 6 had been afloat a decade earlier. The two fleets were the product of a furious shipbuilding race, featuring huge technological advancement and the biggest challenge to Britain's naval dominance in a century. In the late 19th century, the idea that Britain and Germany were about to get into a no-holds-barred naval arms race would have seemed slightly absurd. In 1897, Britain, as the world's leading naval power, possessed a fleet of some 45 battleships, compared to just 8 that were in service in the Imperial German Navy. This made Germany Europe's 5th naval power, and they barely featured in the Royal Navy's planning. Britain was focused instead on the risk of simultaneous wars against its traditional rivals France and Russia, which is why they maintained a two-power standard, with battleship strength always at least equal to the next two largest navies combined. If anything, Germany was a natural potential ally for Britain against France and Russia, but the German Emperor Kaiser Wilhelm II did not really see it that way. He wanted Germany to become a global power, with its own colonial empire and its own powerful navy. In 1897, the Kaiser appointed Rear Admiral Alfred Tirpitz to run the Imperial Navy Office, charging him with persuading the Reichstag to agree to fund the expansion of the navy. Tirpitz proved very able at this. By 1900, he had pushed through a plan to build 38 battleships, enough to give Germany the clear second largest navy on the planet. Support for this was created by redefining Britain as Germany's main rival and the principal obstacle to her colonial ambitions. Tirpitz argued that the only way to deter Britain was with a very powerful fleet. This was called risk fleet theory, and the idea was that if Germany's fleet was sufficiently powerful enough, then Britain would never risk fighting it, for fear that the losses she would take would leave her unacceptably vulnerable to the French and the Russians. It was a nice idea on paper, but it hinged on the idea that Britain would do nothing at all in relation to the German challenge and remain without any allies of her own to call on. But that isn't what happened. Rapidly shifting its foreign policy in the face of sudden German antagonism, by 1904 Britain had concluded alliances with Japan and, most importantly, with France. And to make matters worse for the Kaiser, in March 1906 the British commissioned HMS Dreadnought, a revolutionary new kind of battleship with unmatched firepower and a higher speed than anything the Germans had been building. Dreadnought very famously made every other battleship on Earth obsolete the second she hit the water. Going forward, battleships would either be a Dreadnought or a pre-Dreadnought. If you want to know more about this most revolutionary of ships, I have a video all about it linked in the description down below. Across the North Sea, Tirpitz was aghast at the launching of Dreadnought. It was a dramatic raising of the stakes, and he knew that if Germany was to match it, even greater sums would need to be poured into shipbuilding. The only comfort was that by producing Dreadnought, the Royal Navy had effectively wiped out its own superiority. This was the key decision point for Tirpitz and the Kaiser then. Either they could press on now and launch themselves into a Dreadnought race with Britain, a nation known to have more shipbuilding capability and a lot more money than Germany, or they could give up and accept that the 9 years they had spent building out shipyards and spending huge sums on battleship construction had been a waste of time. In the autumn of 1906, the decision was made. A naval bill was passed through the Reichstag that committed eye-watering sums of money to the development and creation of dreadnoughts, with 3 to be laid down each year and large-scale works to be carried out on the Kiel Canal to accommodate the new battleships. But the Germans had not long got used to the idea of building dreadnoughts before the Royal Navy moved the game on again, commissioning in 1907 a radical new ship that took the Dreadnought concept and applied it to the cruiser force. HMS Invincible was the first of what would come to be known as battle cruisers, combining the high firepower of battleships with the speed of a cruiser. Invincible featured 8 heavy guns that fired a shell with a diameter of 12 inches and a weight of 850 pounds. This was only 2 fewer guns than the Dreadnought, and Invincible had a top speed of 25 knots, 4 knots faster than her battleship cousin. This was achieved by carrying a lot less armour, whereas Dreadnought had a main armour belt that was 11 inches thick at its widest point, Invincible only had 6 inches. This was typical of British ideas about capital ship design at this point, which was to prioritise speed and firepower over having lots of armour. The idea was that bigger guns would give a longer range, which when combined with high speed would allow British battleships and battle cruisers to control the battle, choosing when to engage and being able to hit the enemy at a range where they could not hit back. In such a scenario, it was thought that armour might not be that important at all. Admiral Jackie Fisher, the British First Sea Lord, declared that speed is the best protection, that what counted was the ability to hit the enemy first, hit him hard, and keep hitting. Admiral Tirpitz saw things differently. According to him, the supreme quality of a ship is that it should remain afloat. Tirpitz believed that the best battleships were ones which could take a huge amount of punishment and carry on fighting. German battleships and their own battle cruisers were designed with this in mind, with a rule that every battleship must have an armour belt at least equal in thickness to the calibre of its main guns, and that capital ships of all types must have a large number of small watertight compartments to aid survivability. If that meant giving up some firepower and speed, then so be it. You can see these differing choices starkly in Germany's first commissioned dreadnought SMS Nassau, if we compare it to a British ship, HMS Temeraire, built around the same time. Nassau had 12 11-inch guns, an armour belt of 11 3/4 inches, and a top speed of 19 knots. Temeraire had 10 12-inch guns, an armour belt of 10 inches, and a top speed of 21 knots. Among the battle cruisers, the differences were even more dramatic. Whereas the German Moltke had armour belt that was 11 inches thick in some places, the British Lion, built at the same time, had bigger 13.5-inch guns, a higher speed, and its armour belt topped out at just 9 inches. So as both sides launched themselves into a naval arms race, they had radically different ideas about what was best for capital ship design. And a knot of speed here or an inch of armour there may seem like quite a small amount to be disagreeing over, but these decisions, made in the design room years before anyone saw combat, were going to be literally life or death for thousands of sailors at Jutland in 1916. But before either side could even think about what a fleet battle with these behemoths would look like, they knew they needed as many of them as they could get. And in those initial years of the Dreadnought era, Britain and Germany were actually neck and neck, until suddenly they weren't. By the time the battleships Nassau and Temeraire were under construction in their respective dockyards, the Royal Navy was actually under quite a bit of financial pressure. The British government was trying to rein in naval expenditure to free up cash for other priorities, and the Navy's budget had declined every year since 1905, even as the cost of producing battleships had risen dramatically. To make this work, only 2 capital ships were ordered in 1908, the battleship Neptune and the battlecruiser Indefatigable. That this was a slowdown on previous years was bad enough, but the mood of the Admiralty was worsened further when in March 1908 Tirpitz got another round of naval funding through the Reichstag, raising Germany's shipbuilding program to 4 dreadnoughts a year. Orders for the battleships Helgoland, Ostfriesland and Thüringen, as well as the battlecruiser Moltke, were soon placed. By 1914, the German fleet was planned now to number 21 dreadnoughts, enough to match or maybe even surpass Britain's own fleet. The prospect of Britain's naval superiority being called into question like this set off alarm bells at the Admiralty and created a public outcry. In response, in December 1908, the Navy asked the British government for enough money to build 6 new dreadnoughts the following year. But this proposal met with resistance in cabinet from those who were keen to keep the naval budget under control to provide more money for welfare programs, including the Chancellor David Lloyd George and the President of the Board of Trade, Winston Churchill. A smaller order of 4 ships was proposed instead, but by now an irresistible public momentum had developed behind the construction of more battleships, even beyond what the Admiralty had asked for in the first place. A prominent MP, George Wyndham, coined the phrase, "We want 8 and we won't wait." Eventually, the government gave way, and over a period of 12 months ordered the battleships Colossus, Hercules, Orion, Conqueror, Monarch and Thunderer, and the battlecruisers New Zealand, Australia, Lion and Princess Royal. All but 2 were equipped with the new, more powerful 13.5-inch guns and were christened the Super Dreadnoughts. On top of this enormous jump, the Royal Navy then resolved to lay down 5 dreadnoughts a year going forward. This was an acceleration which German industry just could not match. They simply did not have the shipbuilding capacity or the financial muscle to keep up with Britain here, and it soon showed. And to make matters worse, Britain then seemed to get bored of making ships that had any weaknesses at all. And in 1914 debuted the 5-strong Queen Elizabeth class, which just had everything. They had as much armour as Germany's latest König-class ships, combined with the biggest guns and highest speed ever seen on a battleship. With 15-inch guns, the Queen Elizabeths fired a shell that was twice as heavy as a 12-inch shell. This gave them far greater firepower, with a broadside weight, that is the total amount of explosive that could be fired in one salvo, much greater than any of their rivals. Germany responded to this raising of the stakes with their own class of 15-inch ships led by SMS Bayern, but the first of these would not be ready for active service until the summer of 1916, as Germany's shipbuilding program began to run out of steam. With the prospect of a large-scale European war growing, resources in Germany were shifted towards the army. The 2 Bayerns were the only ships ordered in 1913 and 1914, while the British continued to pump out 5 battleships a year relatively easily. By the outbreak of war, Britain had a dreadnought fleet that was very close to being as large as the French, Russian and German fleets combined. Tirpitz's risk fleet strategy lay in tatters before him. Rather than a powerful fleet deterring a Britain which had many enemies all around the world to worry about, Germany had manoeuvred itself into a position where it had to contest the North Sea against the entire undivided strength of the Royal Navy's Grand Fleet, which was only continuing to grow in strength. Between 1906 and 1917, Britain built 44 dreadnought battleships and battlecruisers to just 27 on the German side. And in fact, this understates British shipbuilding superiority because over the same time period they also built 7 dreadnoughts for other nations. 4 of these were still in Britain on the outbreak of war in 1914 and were seized for British use, including the eclectic HMS Agincourt with its 14 12-inch guns. Together, these 48 dreadnought capital ships represented more than 1.1 million tons of warship, churned out of British shipyards in a little more than 11 years. To put this vast figure into context, if we take the Royal Navy's most recent 1.1 million tons of warship construction, that is starting with HMS Anson, the most recent vessel to be commissioned, and we work backwards, we reach the 1.1 million tons mark with another submarine, HMS Porpoise, commissioned in 1958. The assembly of what would become the Royal Navy's Grand Fleet and the German High Seas Fleet that would oppose it were colossal feats of engineering. The 2 empires had pushed each other to create what were undisputably the 2 most powerful naval forces ever assembled in history. And 2 years after the start of World War I, on May 31st, 1916, these two colossal fleets clashed. 57 capital ships in one place at one time, with control of the sea and perhaps the very course of the First World War at stake. The Battle of Jutland had arrived. And if you want to know more about it, then stay tuned, because I'm going to be telling the story of what I think is the greatest naval battle of all time, starting in the next video. Also, check out the poster behind me. It's packed with information and you can get your own copy of it over on my website. Links in the description and the pinned comment below. It really tells the story of the battle, and every single poster sale helps to support the content on the channel, so I really appreciate it. Thanks as always to my Historiograph patrons, whose names you can see on screen now. Join their ranks to get early access to these videos and more benefits besides, and I'll see you in the next video.